I can't think of anybody better to report on what we're watching with Donald Trump's retaliation campaign, how he's merged MAGA with the Project 2025, and how now, without many people around him to stop him from executing on his worst instincts, but now replaced with enablers and sycophants, he is doing the destructive work of tearing down our constitutional republic. We got an insider's view on Court of History with Miles Taylor. Miles Taylor had worked for Donald Trump as Chief of Staff of Homeland Security, but also famously stepped out and opposed Donald Trump in an op-ed piece in the New York Times under Anonymous, in which he talked about the resistance movement to keep Donald Trump in check. Does that exist today? How do we interpret the actions of Donald Trump in lashing out against all the major institutions of America? Join Miles Taylor as he's just was on Court of History here on Legal AF. And here's a clip.
You know, it's really interesting. On the streets of LA and other American cities, you've got these ICE agents running around masks in vans, grabbing people without warrants and so on orders of Stephen Miller. And so it's at the street level. And yet, all the way up into the West Wing, it's not the TV series. It's the opposite. It's really like Sergei Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible. It's the atmosphere is one of fear and intimidation, just like it is in the streets. And you hear about it. It's a court society operating on paranoia.
It is. And, you know, if we're thinking about this in terms of the Court of History, I mean, Sid, you kicked off the program by saying this is where politics and law and the Constitution meet. Well, imagine that only one of those shows up at the party and it's just politics and the other two aren't there. It's a very, very different party without the Constitution and without law. And I think that's what this is looking like now. I mean, those attendees are no longer here when decisions are being made. Decisions are being made purely on the nature of politics, and more specifically than that, one man's personal politics. And that, of course, is something that we saw in the first term with regularity, as the president wanted to make decisions all the time that personally benefited him and which flew in the face of the public interest. Let me give you an example. Often this would happen on disaster aid. There would be a state or a locality led by a mayor or a governor that the president hated, and they got hit by a hurricane or tornadoes or wildfires. And when we were on the cusp of dispersing aid to people whose homes were in the rubble, the president would say, "I want you to hold back the money." We'd say, "Mr. President, I mean, we can't do that. I mean, our obligation is, if we've declared a disaster area there, we've got to disperse the funds." But he would want to stop the flow of money so he could get leverage over that person, whether it was at the time Jerry Brown in California or, the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico. You know, if they opposed him, he wanted to stop the money, make sure they knew about it, and find ways to get them to demonstrate fealty, his personal preferences over the actual lives of Americans who needed urgent federal support. That, I think, especially in emergencies, to me was the most illustrative example of how Donald Trump was putting himself and his self-interest first, and where it had very real-world consequences for people. Now, we, of course, almost always talked the president out of that or denied it, turned it back around. But, we just saw this week that Donald Trump announced that he's going to be getting rid of FEMA after hurricane season. And then there was a handful of words he said at this news conference that I think people missed because they're so focused on the other news. He said decisions about disaster aid will be brought into the office of the president. In other words, that thing that we stopped time and time again in the first term of the president personally deciding who gets aid and who doesn't in America, he's now just telegraphed to the whole country, I will be making the decision. If there's a hurricane or a wildfire, your government won't just respond. First, Donald Trump needs to decide, do you deserve it? That's very, very scary, and it's gotten almost no coverage.
Yeah, it's what Sean was talking about. He's gone full mafia, and it's not that he's a mafia boss alone. He's trying to transform the American government into a mafia state. based on shakedowns that he runs, includes tariffs.
That's right. I mean, there's a quote that I go back to a lot because I also felt like it was revealing in terms of who Donald Trump is and what his priorities are. We were sitting in the Oval Office one afternoon for a meeting with the president on a particular national security issue, and he came in and sort of apropos of nothing, he told the small group of us on the couches about a lesson he had learned in his life and business. And he said, I learned in business that if you threaten to sue somebody, they just wave their hand and say, psh, and they ignore you. But whether you have a case or not, and you sue them, they'll settle with you. And his point was that if you want leverage over someone and to get them to do something for you, you need to actually have something you hold over their head. And so even if you don't have proof of wrongdoing or something that they want, if you create that leverage out of nowhere, you sue them, you put them in the prospect of a legal fight, then they'll do things that you want to. And this philosophy of personal leverage is the simplest way to explain how Donald Trump does everything from engage in foreign relations with whether it's Japan or North Korea, all the way down to how he handles wildfire aid into a specific locality. He is perpetually on the hunt for leverage. He doesn't always know why he wants it, but he just knows that once he has it, he's got optionality.
Well, he has, he's not to be put too fine a point on it, a malignant narcissist, and that's, he wants domination, control, and that's where he gets his gratification. But this also extends to how he's treated everybody, the entire civil society, from the National Portrait Gallery and the Smithsonian to the law firms, to the universities, to CBS, ABC, you name it. This is the common pattern that you have described.
Well, and you look no further than the Department of Justice to see how warped this becomes when the department turns into one man's personal law firm instead of pursuing genuine national security issues. And I'll selfishly point to my case. I mean, Donald Trump has claimed that because I spoke out against him, I have committed espionage and I'm a national security threat to the United States. I can only assume that there are anywhere from a handful to, maybe a dozen bureaucrats focused on the danger right now from Miles Taylor as they execute Trump's executive order. But does anyone for a second think that Miles Taylor is the national security threat bigger than China or Russia or Iran when it comes to folks domestically we need to worry about? No. I mean, there are actual espionage threats from those countries that, because he's chosen to focus on his political enemies, are getting insufficient attention. I mean, this has real world impacts much beyond just my family. The American people are paying for a government now that's working for one man's personal self-interest. It's literally not serving them. It's serving him. And that's got ripple effects, secondary and tertiary consequences that are beyond description.
This is where John Gotti meets Louis XIV. I mean, it's not just l'état c'est moi, and so anything that is in the only interest is his interest. There is no national interest, and that's what it looks like.
Yeah, Miles, I have neighbors and friends and know all kinds of people who have worked in DOJ. I know somebody who works in cybersecurity in DOJ. Half of the unit's gone under Trump in the second term. People are not tracking the Chinese and the Russian cyber attacks on the United States, on United States citizens, on United States industry, on the U.S. government. And these kinds of prosecutions are not happening. And we all know he's gutted all of the public integrity unit of DOJ, that the ability to prosecute corruption both domestically and internationally has been gutted under Trump. He's cleared the way for a kleptocracy and for our foreign adversaries, which is, there's nothing that could be more dangerous.
And this leads to the international question I have too, because a lot of this, mafia state stuff that he has here is very much clearing the way for other mafia states around the world. Not, Vladimir Putin, perhaps, above all. How much of this is an international, crime syndicate as well as a national one?
I think it is hugely. It's why you saw in the first Trump administration these stories about him wanting to pull out of NATO and abrogate trade treaties and undertake all these punitive actions towards America's allies, because Trump wanted, much like he does domestically, he wanted leverage over them. He wanted to be able to control them and bully them into what he wanted to do. And on the world stage, what he wants to do is form deeper alliances with autocratic regimes. And there was a lot of head scratching when I was in the Trump administration about why. People couldn't figure out, why does Trump love these autocrats? So, John Kelly asked me directly one day, we were flying to New York City for him to do a speech. And he said, I just don't get it. Why is he so in love with Putin? And to me, not that I'm some genius, I'm not, I was never a social friend of Donald Trump, but to me, the reason was obvious and much simpler than, him being a part of some multi-decade private conspiracy where he's a spy for a foreign government. The answer is simpler. He learned another thing in business, and that is it's a lot easier to cut deals with autocrats than it is to cut deals with Democrats with a small d. Because in democracy, there are layers, there's the rule of law, there's the courts, all of these things that have often hamstrung Donald Trump in his quest for money and power. But when you work with these autocratic or quasi-autocratic countries, you can just get deals done faster. You can shake hands, you can pay money in suitcases, and you can go build a tower 10 times as fast as you can, in Turkey or Russia than you can in France or the United Kingdom. And I think that's why he's had cozy relationships with these autocrats. It's why he wants to cut the all-time sweeping deal with Xi Jinping in China, is because after this is all over, he wants to be closer to those folks because that's where he thinks he's going to see the greatest personal benefit. And you know what? He's probably right. And is that right for America? No, but the deals he's cut throughout the Middle East and in East Asia and beyond have already very, very materially personally benefited him and likely will. I mean, you could maybe make the case we can't rerun history. We can't rerun the court of history, even if we want that time machine that Sid mentioned. And if we could hop into the DeLorean, I suspect we would see that if Trump had not ingratiated himself with these countries, his business empire would be in shambles on the back end of his first term. But of course, after this one in particular, financially, Trump will likely be set for life because of the deals he's done with these countries.
Yeah, let me ask you how this Stalin-esque executive order has affected you and your personal life, your business life, your family, and how people have treated you as a result. What's happened?
Well, yeah, look, this is one of those things that my wife and I debated a lot about whether to come forward and have this conversation, because when you pull back that personal layer of how these things impact your life, it can just be humiliating, to show folks that something like this actually does have a real effect. And you also worry about sending that signal. You don't want the White House to know that this tactic works. But ultimately, our decision was, it's really important for the public interest for people to understand how dangerous this really is. And the short version is, in the wake of the order, I was forced to leave my job. I'm the sole income earner in my household and was doing consulting work with tech companies. That was no longer viable because, I became a liability to those companies who might also be targeted then by Donald Trump if associated with me.
Let me just interrupt and say, you've done nothing wrong. You have committed no wrongdoing, and yet this is happening.
Correct. And not only that, I mean, to be even clearer about it, in the president's executive order against me, he sort of inverted the justice system. He started with my conviction, which is that he declared I was likely guilty of espionage and treason, and therefore a crime punishable by death in the United States. Therefore, I should be ostracized. And then in the order, he asks his lieutenants to effectively go find the evidence of that. So he's delivered my conviction and then said, oh, by the way, go find the evidence for this conviction. And that, of course, is absurd. And I know very much that the things that I said about Donald Trump were not things that were classified, because criticism is not classified in the United States of America. To criticize a president is not classified. And I know my national security obligations, and never even veered close to saying things I shouldn't have. But Donald Trump took those criticisms of his impulsiveness, of his vengeful nature, very, very personally, and wanted to issue this order to send a message like his aides said. And so in the wake of that, it did have a
message to them to shut up.
That's right.
But also, you're guilty until proven innocent, except you'll never be proven innocent.
Yeah,
That's
but
right.
it's also to his own aides, even now, people there who you're in touch with, who are intimidated.
Well, and he shows them, here's the full scope effect it can have on your life,
Right.
Because, having to leave my job, my wife has stayed home with our baby. We had a cash crunch. We had to figure out how she could return to work, how I could take on the baby. We had to launch a legal defense fund so we wouldn't lose our home amidst this, and so we could fight back. We have been on the receiving end of a range of security threats. We've had, MAGA stalkers as far out as the West Coast that have digitally harassed, doxed, sent violent and threatening messages to our family members, sent photos of family members' houses, claimed that they were nearby those houses. I mean, really, really nasty stuff has happened. And it completely consumes your life. And then you add into that, there is a deep, deep social isolation that is happening in the second Trump administration that didn't happen in the first. And I'm a student of history, and the only place I've ever read about anything like this is in autocratic countries where targets of official power become deeply socially isolated, and even their close friends and family will defect. That may be the imperfect word, but will defect from their social orbit out of fear of also being targeted.
Mm-hmm.
This has happened to us. We've had very close family members who we would have never expected wouldn't be in the trenches with us, because they were when I first came out against Trump. But this time we've had some of them say, hey, we need our distance. I had an extremely close friend just the other week who sat down with me and said, look, I've got business interests in the national security community. We're going to have to stay away from you and Hannah for a while to protect those. No one has to play the violin for me about that, but I give those examples to show the impact this can have. But it goes much beyond that. I mean, I'm doing an event in a couple of days here in a major U.S. city, and we had the venue pull out, the caterer pull out, and the moderator pull out over the course of several weeks, because each of them was afraid, not because they disagreed with me politically, they were worried that if they did this fundraiser for my legal defense fund, that they would be in the crosshairs of the president.
They just came up with this on their own. I mean, they weren't. Nobody called them up and said, "You better get rid of this guy." This is something that's self-reflecting.
The caterer,
right?
Yeah, they're self-censoring. So the caterer for this event we were going to do said, "I so support you in what you're doing. I'm just worried that I'll have employees that are deported if I serve soft drinks at a Miles Taylor legal defense fundraiser." That really, we didn't see anything like that in the first term. The fear of association is extremely high. And again, you only see that in autocratic countries. Someone's like, I can't even serve Diet Coke at that event because my employees might be deported by the president as an act of revenge. And it wouldn't be unreasonable for an everyday listener to hear that and say, yeah, but really, would that happen? Well, I mean, we just saw news stories this week that Barron Trump's friend was calling up the Department of Homeland Security to have TikTokers he didn't like deported from the United States. And what did DHS do? They deported the individual. So, I mean, there is real personal retribution happening in this country, and it's having the intended effects.
This is Barron Trump's good friend, a buddy?
Allegedly, Barron Trump's closest friend called the Department of Homeland Security and tipped them off about...
Has this been reported?
It was just reported in the past couple of days. And this is one of the largest TikTokers in the world, a guy who has like 150 million plus followers. And he was deported from the US. And Barron's buddy came out and publicly took credit for it, I think in a podcast interview. I look, things like that happen when you're in government. And, Sid, I'm sure you were on the receiving end at points of phone calls where people are like, hey, I want a political favor.
You name it.
Yeah, and your response is like, okay, do you also want me to go to prison for doing that? I mean, when I was at DHS, all the time we would get phone calls from other cabinet secretaries or members of Congress or celebrities saying, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so has an immigration issue. Can you personally go sort it out? And you're like, look, we created this system to be impartial. No, I can't go do this favor or deport this person. It's not how government's supposed to work. Sid, you never did that. I never did that. But now this is something people are apparently going and boasting about on media is, oh yeah, I'm calling in and having people I don't like deported. And if that doesn't seem outlandish enough, just this week, the Department of Homeland Security basically put out propaganda posters that said, here's the 800 number to call if you want to give us tips of people you want to send out of the country.
I wrote about that in my column in The Guardian, which is up today if people want to read it. They have an Uncle Sam who's not asking you to join government service or join the U.S. military, but to act as an informer, and that against the so-called enemy within, who happens to be any immigrant you decide, or person who looks different, right, and report them to the government. This is Stasi stuff. And yet you speak up, Miles, and you've decided to come out and talk about things, including here.
Well, in the court of history, Sid might prove me a fool for doing so. I'm pretty sure that Cato the Younger, killed himself after he did something like that. Cicero was beheaded and had his, hands chopped off as well for deciding to speak out. You go through a whole line of folks that I'm not comparing myself to those two gentlemen of antiquity, but you can go through history and find that it often doesn't end well for the dissenter. In fact, it very rarely ends well for the dissenter.
Well, we'll see how this goes over the long
run. Hopefully they leave my hands and head in place, but I will say, the one of the reasons why we felt like, my wife and I have talked through the need to come out is we need to show folks that the price of dissent in America has become unacceptably high, extraordinarily high right now. And those threats to free speech extend much beyond us, because if the president of the United States can destroy our lives with a pen stroke, and there's nothing stopping him from doing that, other than, does his hand get tired at the end of the day? He could do 20 a day or 50 a day or 100 or 1,000, but they know that all they need to do is show a handful of us, like me or Chris Krebs, can be decimated by this. And then they just wield the fear against any individual they interact with that, hey, you don't do what the president wants, and it's very easy for him to implement one of these orders. And so we are in the process legally of pushing back against this forcefully. We took a step the other week and filed a formal legal complaint with the federal watchdogs that oversee the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security to get them to look into these unconstitutional violations of our rights. But there's a series of escalating legal steps we will take, because we need to draw the line that presidents are not kings and presidents cannot do this. And so I hope at the end of this, we will have helped draw that line, because if we don't, then quite fundamentally and literally, free speech in the United States is endangered.
Well, thanks for appearing here, for speaking out.
I'm very grateful. Very grateful.
Yeah, and it's very important for everybody to support you and people like you and others whose voices need to be heard about what's going on with.
Well, I'll say, Sid, we are lucky that we've effectively had our legal defense crowdsourced amidst this. People I've never met in my life have donated to this nonprofit, Whistleblower Aid, the group that represented the intelligence community whistleblower.
Where can they do that?
They can go to endpresidentialrevenge.org. And it's a legal defense fund, not just for my family, but other targets of presidential revenge.
What was the name again? I didn't.
And presidential revenge.
Presidentialrevenge.org. Yeah.
And that's where people can contribute.
We should find a way to publicize that, Sid. We should get that out as best we can.
Well, I think we just did.
Well, and I'll tell you, if it weren't for that, we would not have been able to take on the legal team that we did. We would not have been able to file the legal complaint that we did. And we wouldn't be able to plan these next steps to hopefully stop this from happening to other people. So it's meant a ton. And I suppose out of all of this, it's been one of the bright sides is just we've been, Hannah and I have been so buoyed by the support that we've gotten around the country. So just very grateful for any listeners who can help pitch in.
Well, thank you, Miles. And stay safe and keep speaking out. And for the Court of History, the ultimate court, Sean and I thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I can't think of a better group of historians to collaborate with Legal AF than Sidney Blumenthal and Sean Wilentz. And look at the quality of guests that they're able to bring on. It's now national news that Miles joined us and shared with us his insights. And now you've been briefed as well. Take a moment, hit the free subscribe button. If you like this kind of content, we got about a dozen contributors here on a channel that I curate. I'm Michael Popak, the founder of Legal AF, the YouTube channel, and co-founder of the podcast. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popak. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.